Hi, I'm Edd China, and this is the DELEKS DK-800 wood chipper. It's a registered design unique to DELEKS, and it's fantastic for getting those big branches down into small chips to reduce that garden waste, and it's brilliant for both medium-sized gardens right up to pro landscapers. It's a really useful tool to have around the garden. Now, as you can see, it comes with a range of 4 different motor options, so let's start there. Now, the entry-level model is probably this, the Chinese Lifan 190 FD. Now, although it is the cheapest in the range, they've been used in the field for at least 10 years or so without any issues. It's a great little runner, although perhaps it does have the smallest dealer or service network. Now, next up would be the Briggs & Stratton XR2100. Now, these guys have been making industrial and agricultural motors for a very long time, so you definitely know you're going to be getting a quality product. Beyond that, you then have the Yamaha. Now, these guys are actually quite new to the game, and the MX400 is very typical of their engineering prowess. Now, they've got a nice couple of design features on there, particularly the exhaust silencer makes this the quietest of all 4 of these motors. And it also has probably the fastest growing service network and dealer network. And finally, we have here the Honda GX390. Now, these guys invented the industrial motor. They have been going forever. They've been going since the very beginning, so you know what you're going to get. But also, they have by far the biggest worldwide support network. Now, really, when it comes to choosing which of these motors to go for, it's probably going to come down to which brand you're most familiar with, perhaps what your other tools are based on, or really, who's your closest service engineer. But either way, they all come with electric start, and they all come with a 3-year warranty. So you know whatever you go for, you're going to get a quality product. Now, let's crack on and look inside the machine itself. Now, whichever motor you finally go for, the DK-800 underneath will be exactly the same. So just explain a bit about how it actually works. Of course, you put your branches and logs and stuff into this end. Then you have the drum in the middle spinning at about between 1800 and 2200 RPM. There are 2 blades, and of course they're chopping those branches down into tiny chips, and the tiny chips are blown out of this high discharge tube. And as with all these kinds of machines, you can choose exactly where you want those to exit. Now, there's a couple of nice features. When you're traveling, you want to make the machine slightly smaller. You can do that just by closing it down like so. Also, there's a nice little toolkit here just to keep your tools safe while you're out in the field. And in fact, talking about tools, each of the machines comes with its own bag, and in said bag you have some spare blades, you have some spare belts, some tools, and even a tin of orange paint just in case you damage your machine. Now, if I just spin this round so you can see more clearly, you can now see the really good width of those tyres. It's much more easy to maneuver in difficult terrain. So now we can start to see how easy it is to take this machine apart. Just to get the hopper open, you just undo these 2 clips. They spin round. So that opens it up quite nicely. So then you can get access should there be some kind of blockage or whatever. You can also then see you've got this rubber protection to stop things spitting back at you when you're fitting things in through the hopper. Also, if you want to remove this, it's very simple. You just disconnect this wire here, and then you can actually just lift it up and pop it away. Now, removing the hopper gives you great access to any blockages if you need to kind of clear out inside. But you can now see you've got one of the blades on the drum, and you can also see the static blade. Now, there are 2 blades on the drum, and obviously the static blade sits there, and then these other blades come round again and again, rather like a guillotine as opposed to scissors. Now, the idea is that you need to make sure that the gap between the static blade and the moving blades is exactly right. It's got to be a very precise measurement, but it's very easy to set that adjustment on this machine. Now, there are 5 bolts that you can see just underneath here which hold that static blade in position. You undo those slightly, and then on the back there are actually 4 bolts that adjust that position. Now, to make it easier to adjust, I can show you on the bench. Now, with the drum out of the machine, it's much easier to see what's going on inside. First of all, you can see you've got the 2 blades that are spinning round at high speed. But you also, if you look closely, you can see that both edges of those blades are sharp. And the idea is that if it starts to blunt in the field, you could quite literally just unbolt the blades, swap them over, put them back together again, and it would double the longevity of your cutting time. Now, the only thing is to make sure that this static blade is the right distance from this blade, but it's very easy to set because in the kit comes this metal spacer. and that will just be pushed in between the two. You then adjust those 4 bolts on the machine just to push this blade backwards and forwards till it's the right amount. It touches the spacer and touches the blade, and then it's set, ready for more work. Well, now we can see this side of the machine. There's a few more points that are worth noting. You can see here there's a safety switch, so when the hopper is either open or in fact removed, there is no way that the machine will run, which means it makes the risk of cutting your fingers off much less. Also, you can see now quite clearly the 2 oil fillers on either side of the engine. Now, to make sure you have the right oil level, the best way is to undo both of them, pop in your Shell lubricant, fill up the oil, and you know it's actually full at the right level when a bit of oil spills out on either side of those oil fillers. And then you can put everything back together again, knowing that that's been maintained nicely. Now, talking of maintenance, the next thing would be the belts, and they are behind this cover, which is held on with 4 bolts. Well, now with the cover removed, we can see a bit more detail. First of all, you can see the centrifugal clutch on the top pulley there. Now, obviously that won't kick in until the motor is up to speed, but also it helps absorb some of the shock loading as you're putting slightly bigger pieces of wood into the hopper. Now, on the bottom pulley, this is perhaps more significant. On a traditional machine, you would see a shaft with a slot, a keyway in there, and basically the key and then the pulley sitting on top of that. Now, normally it's difficult to get that really tight, so there's a bit of chatter. And as that chatter gets worse, of course, it starts to damage the shaft. And if the shaft gets damaged, because it's part of the drum, you'd have to replace the whole thing. That's very expensive. With the DELEKS solution here, we have a taper lock bearing, which actually holds everything very, very tightly, so there is no chatter at all, so it lasts a lot longer. Now, to tighten or loosen or even maintain or change the belts, then what you need to do is actually use this bolt here to actually move the whole of the motor plate backwards and forwards. And to do that, first what you need to do is undo the 4 bolts that hold it down onto the DK-800. You have to undo them all the way. Now you can see here that these belts are B section and they're 17 millimeters wide, which is nice and big and chunky, so it's great at transmitting that huge amount of power. With that last piece removed, you can actually now see a bit more clearly that to get to the drum, should you chuck a bit of metal in there by mistake, for example, and cause a bit of damage, it's actually quite easy to get the drum out. You just undo the bolts around here, you disconnect the bearing on the back side, do the same on this side with the grub screw, and then you should be able to remove the whole lot out. Well, grazie Antonio for cutting our little window here, thank you. So now we can see inside the drum as it's spinning. So if I just spin this round, you can see the 2 blades spinning around against the second one here. So if I was to put a twig or a branch in here, do it slowly, because of course this is going to be spinning at about 2,000 RPM. So the twig will be here, and then you can see it's actually cut between this and this, just like a really sharp guillotine. Works brilliantly. Now the rest of the machine is just as easy to take apart, including removal of the tow hitch, but also you can unbolt the high discharge tube, and you can replace that with a low discharge funnel. Now this is mainly used when your trees are very, very green and with lots of sap that might otherwise get stuck in the tube. So all in all, a very capable machine made out of very high quality parts.